Hi there, my name is Sean McGeever, and I'm a Young Life leader at Pinnacle High School. And I am going through the Gospel of John. And this week I'm talking about John chapter 12. And, uh, the approach that I've been taking is to go through every chapter. This is a challenging chapter to go through to fit into the normal mold of a Young Life talk. So I just say that at the beginning, but as I've said before, I think that makes it really important for us to pay attention to so that we don't just think about the message that we want to have, but maybe the message that is actually there in the Bible. With that said, this has really, chapter 12 of John has like three main parts. The first one is Jesus's anointing at Bethany. The second part is the triumphal entry when Jesus goes into Jerusalem and when they say Hosanna. And then really the whole rest of the chapter, almost the majority of the chapter, is about Jesus predicting his death, and people continue to not believe in him. That last chunk is a bit complicated. I wouldn't do that for a club talk. I would probably do either the triumphal entry or the story of Jesus being anointed at Bethany. Now, just where this falls with the way that we do it, it's a bit in the middle of the semester. And with it being in the middle of the semester, I've decided to focus on doing a club talk on Jesus anointed at Bethany because it gives an opportunity through, and I'll talk about it in a moment, through the different people who are in the story, for maybe everyone to kind of pause for a moment and think about where would they find themselves, which person in the story would they identify with, about their approach to Jesus. So I think it could fit really well in the midst of the middle of a semester, kind of to check in and see, what people think for themselves about Christ. So here's just a little outline. Basically, the story of Jesus being anointed at Bethany is the first 11 verses. It talks about, the first verse talks about the location, and then it talks about a dinner, and then it talks about other people who are around. So that's kind of the three main parts: the location, the dinner itself, and who was at the dinner, and then the people who were around, which were the Jews who were seeking to kill Jesus and Lazarus at this point. So I would break up, the explanation of the Bible story into those three parts. Now, the first part is about Bethany, that they went to Bethany, and I have this in my relevant technical details, and I'll just skip to that. But the word Bethany can mean one of two things. One, it can literally mean the house of figs, or where you can find like figs, like a fig tree. Or it can mean the house of the afflicted, or the place or location of afflicted people. Other translations and approaches to it, you could say house of the afflicted, house of the depressed, house of those who are miserable, or even house of those who are poor. And with Bethany being a location of Mary, of Martha, of Lazarus, of other needy people, that we find in the Gospels, I think that the sense that John has in mind here, and I think the one that's helpful for us and in this story because of the perfume, is that it's the house of the afflicted and the house of the poor. So literally Jesus is at a place that not only is poor and there's people who are super needy, but the name of the town is even communicates that. So that's where Jesus is at. Second, the dinner. Now, this is kind of where the action is at. And I think the best way to think about it is to think, who are the people, who are the characters in the story? So first off, we have Martha, who was serving. And this goes back, and this is in my notes here, but these are the same Mary and Marthas that you would find in Luke 10, where Mary listened at Jesus' feet, but Martha busied herself with housework. So you can look at Luke 10 just for a bit of a reference. So we have Martha, and once again, she's serving, she's busy. We have Lazarus, who was raised from the dead, and he is reclining. We have Mary, who we'll talk a bit more about, and she is worshiping Jesus. And we have Judas, who is pointing out the incredible waste of money for his own selfish reasons of what's going on there. And then we have the Jews. So there's basically 5 sets of people who are in this story. And so that's with the dinner. Dialing in a little bit more to Mary, what she does there is really the focal point of this entire story. And if you were to, in a club talk, focus on anything, I would focus on what it is that she's doing, which is she takes the pure nard, which is odd, right? We don't really talk about nard and anything like that. Well, I have a note a bit about what that is, that you can read, but it's an oil that's extracted from a plant from India, which would have been far away and difficult to acquire, thus making it quite expensive. And it's important to know that this was, about a year's wages, which we have found in verse 5. And that, why did she have something like this? If she's in a poor town and what we find later is she probably doesn't have a lot of, she's probably a prostitute. Why does she have all this money? So it may have been that it was an heirloom passed down in her family. Whatever it is, she has all this really expensive perfume. And she decides to anoint Jesus, and not only to pour it on Jesus, but to pour it on his feet, and then to wipe Jesus's feet with her hair. So when they would anoint people in those days with perfume or oil, they would put it on their head, and that would be the natural place, and it would kind of come down a little bit. We have that in the Bible in several places. She decides to anoint not his head, but his feet, and this communicates her humility. When you would do anything for people's feet, it would be the place of a servant, typically to wash their feet. So she is taking the lowest place possible, that of a servant or of a slave, and trying to do something for his feet. So it's an incredibly humble and humiliating place to be. Second, she uses her hair, and that is a statement in and of itself, because Jewish women, and I have this little note in here, wouldn't have done that. Jewish women never unbound their hair in public unless they are suspected of adultery. And so when she's doing this, she's really making a public display of what people could see as, you must be a person of pretty loose morals. But she really doesn't care. I mean, she is so captivated by Jesus in that moment that not only is she willing to put certainly her most prized and most expensive possession and have it be consumed in this worship of Jesus, but she doesn't care what it looks like. She doesn't care if people misunderstand her, even have the wrong idea about her, or what her intentions are with Jesus. She just is in incredible worship and devotion to Jesus. And then the one interesting thing about perfume is, I'm sure it filled the room. It says that and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So her worship was not only visually obvious, but people would have just been overwhelmed by their senses about what Jesus deserves and what she was trying to do in communicating her devotion to Jesus. So that's a bit. I've kind of skipped around, but that's a bit about it. Here's a couple main points. One is how much is too much when we understand who Jesus really is. So in your club talk, you could say, what are we really talking about here? And you could kind of say, this isn't just about like a casual following of Jesus. Every once in a while, Christmas and Easter might kind of give him an appropriate head nod, something like that. Go to a camp when you feel like you need a little spiritual injection, though we all can use that. How much is too much? Both our entire reputation and everything we possess are to be given in honor to Jesus. So basically, everything that we have and everything that we are is what Jesus is asking for, and is not only that, but it's the appropriate response to Christ. But I think maybe an easier, or maybe a clearer, main point for a question in a club talk would be, who do you identify with? And I think you could go down the line and say, do you identify with Martha, who's too busy to notice Jesus? Maybe you come to club and you like hearing the talks, but you really haven't stopped to think about this in depth. Two, are you perhaps like Lazarus? Maybe you've had some really impactful moment with Jesus in the past, and you're just kind of chilling with Jesus, just kind of going with the flow. I mean, what Lazarus is doing in the story isn't necessarily negative, but he's not super engaged in the worship of Jesus. Mary, which we spoke about. Mary's in complete devotion to Jesus. We have Judas, who's critical of Jesus people, um, and a bit on the fence. He hasn't totally decided in his head to betray Jesus, but we can tell that he has a lot of selfish motivation at this point, but maybe just critical of Jesus people. And then you have Jews, who, the ones that are spoken of, at least in this passage, are clearly against Jesus to the point of wanting him dead. So, hopefully in our club we don't have people who want Jesus dead, but you could just generalize it. There are people who are against Jesus. And so there's a really good spectrum with some different dynamics of each of those five people in the story. What does this story tell us about Jesus? First off, Jesus was with people and ate at their houses. So, he was personal. He understood what real life was like. He wasn't just some God out there that, exists in churches or temples or things like that. Second, Jesus allowed himself to be worshipped in an extravagant way, even in the midst of extremely poor and needy people. So Jesus didn't say, "Oh, no, really, don't do this." He allowed it to happen to him. So what does this tell us about Jesus? He understood that this was an appropriate and right response, even in what some people might think is wasting a year's worth of wages in the midst of people who really need, probably could really benefit from these things. That one's really difficult to kind of wrap your head around, because certainly Jesus wants just as an aside, the kingdom of God people, Christians, to be all about that. That is what one of the calls that we have, which is to, help people. Yet in the midst of this, Jesus is saying, no, this is actually the right place and the right way to do this. I do deserve this. And in that way, Jesus is certainly showing his divine attributes there. Any human alone would, in the right mind with the values that Jesus spoke of, would say this isn't the right thing to do. So that he accepts it shows that he's certainly divine. Then Jesus knew that he was about to die. So that's something else that we learn about Jesus, and it can foreshadow the club talks that you might give in the coming weeks. What does this have to do with our life? Well, we all have an attitude about Jesus. Even a passive attitude makes a statement. So once again, you could dial into those five different places or people and say, all of us have a perspective about Jesus, whether, we really acknowledge it or not. And also, what does this have to do with our life? Even the most worthy and important needs of the world pale in comparison to how we respond to Jesus. So as much as we might be passionate about certain causes and all that, Jesus is saying, no, I'm above all of those things. To go through a couple technical details and just some illustrations, and then I'm done. I already talked a bit about Bethany. We talked about Lazarus being the person that Jesus has raised from the dead earlier. I talked a bit about Mary and Martha from Luke 10. Talked about the pure nard, the perfume, the oil. Then I talked about how she wiped his feet with her hair. So really I kind of talked through in the explanation there of some of these technical details that might not be obvious from the text just from reading it. But to come back to some illustrations, here are a couple. One is you could bring the most expensive thing that you have that you could bring in there and just use an explanation of like, I wouldn't want to give this up. I mean, this is really important to me. In my case, perhaps, like I have a really expensive guitar. I don't bring it to club because I'm pretty sure kids would ruin it. But I might bring it in for this club talk and I say, this is one of the most important things to me. And I wouldn't just give it away for anything. But, Jesus is saying, that, here, I want everything you have. I'm worth way more than this. So you could go and use just something that you have that's really expensive if you can bring it in and you want to risk bringing it into a club. You could also have some perfume that you open up and maybe you splash around a bit and people could, in a sensory way, engage in your talk and kind of go, what's that like? And you go, well, the point of perfume is for you to have an experience with it. And you could say, this woman's worship was something that just wasn't for her, but for other people to understand what was going on. It certainly would have caught their attention. So you could bring in some perfume and just kind of use that to bring the story to life. But I think the best illustration would be thinking about those different five people or five different kind of perspectives in the story, I think you could get some, you could make a poster, just write their names on it. You could get a whiteboard and write their names and maybe do a checkbox and on the screen, on the board, and say, which one would you say you would check that you identify with this person or their perspective. You could put a PowerPoint slide of the list of names. You could say, look at these names and let me describe them to you. And think, I'm going to give you 10 seconds, 15 seconds in your mind silently to think, this is where I'm at today. I think that might be the best direction to go and might be the best hook as far as engaging people in the story. So, I think it's a challenging one for a club, but I think I've tried to do my best to maybe point out how it could be used. But you could also use the triumphal entry one. That might be another option. But I hope that these ideas are helpful and that your club talks through the Gospel of John are going well. So I'll talk to you later. Thanks.